Hey guys, can you believe it? It's our last day of school for the year. I know it feels super weird, but I just, I'm so proud of you. We made it. We made it through this really weird time, and hopefully we'll look back on this someday and be able to be like, oh boy, what a year. um, yeah. So the last little section here we're going to go through for today is called Into the Future. And the guiding question for that is, how did the Japanese maintain their sense of identity through the Meiji period and beyond? So yesterday we were talking about their military expansion, and now today we're going to talk about their sense of identity. Um, so how do you feel about change in your life? Do you welcome it, or does it make you uncomfortable? What are the positive and negative aspects of change? During the Meiji period, many people in Japan thought that their country was changing too quickly. For others, change was not complete enough, or fast enough, or the right type. So we've talked a lot about change in this whole unit, um, and kind of our personal ideas towards change. But in any group, you're going to have very different ideas, right? People who want lots, people who want none, um, and that's really normal. Embracing change. Some Japanese thinkers were not pleased when the process of adopting Western ways slowed down. They felt it was not enough to borrow technology or to copy military power. These people were disturbed that Japan's political and education system seemed to be returning their country to old authoritarian ways. Authoritarian means like, let's see what the actual definition is. Um, Favoring or enforcing strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. That's a great definition. So they felt like it was making them go back to this idea of everyone just follows along, is obedient without having their own personal thoughts and expression. They argued that modern peace-loving civilizations became prosperous by giving citizens freedoms, rights, and democracy. They criticized the Meiji regime for paying too much attention to the military and war. They worried that Japan was trying to become a powerful state rather than a civilized society. So this is interesting. A powerful state, meaning they thought that they were too concerned with becoming powerful in the eyes of everyone else, that they were losing their civilization, their humanness, their kindness, their focus on society and the group and everyone being okay. Think it through. You have explored how a return to military values, such as discipline, loyalty, influenced the development of Japan during the Meiji period. What other Japanese values might have led to Japan following a different path? So they returned to military values, discipline, loyalty, and that sort of influenced them. So what other values might have led to Japan following a different path? So values being things that are important to them. Zoom in. So we're going to sort of focus on one person here, and his name is Itagaki Taisuki. Wow. I'm terrible at pronouncing Japanese names. That's one thing I've learned in this unit. So Itagaki Taisuki was a Japanese politician who was born a lord of the Kochi clan during the Edo period. So he was born during the Edo period. His career lasted from the end of the shogunate through the Meiji period. So he lived kind of in both. Itagaki joined the anti-shogunate forces and became a senior official during the Meiji Restoration. So he was against the shogunate and then became kind of a politician in the Meiji Restoration. Itagaki is an important figure in Japan because of his work to establish a popularly elected parliament. So his work was to establish a government that was elected by people. He was all about democracy. He felt that the Meiji leaders were not interested in promoting freedom and individual rights for Japanese citizens. He became the leader of the Freedom and People's Rights movement, which encouraged the government to create a new constitution and the Diet, or the parliament. However, Itagaki believed that true democracy had not been established because only men who paid a high amount of taxes were given the right to vote. So he helped kind of come up with this system, but he was like, it's still not democracy because the only people that can vote are people who have money and who are men, and that's not fair. However, he helped form Japan's first political party, the Liberal Party, When he was attacked for his political beliefs by a man with a knife, he famously said, "Itagaki may die, but liberty never." So he is a huge advocate for democracy in Japan. So this picture, it says in 1952, wow, 3, Itagaki's picture was put on the 10 yen banknote. How does this reflect his importance to Japan? What do you think? And then to what extent are Itagaki's values similar to those of Canadians today? Do you think that there's some things in common between his values then and Canadians' values today? What are those similarities? Okay, most people wanted Japan to continue to adapt, borrowing useful ideas and practices from the West without violating Japan's sense of tradition. Here's a comment from an 1889 newspaper. "We recognize the excellence of Western civilization. We value the Western theories of rights, liberty, and equality, and we respect Western philosophy and morals. Above all, we esteem Western science, economics, and industry. These, however, ought not to be adopted simply because they are Western. They ought to be adopted only if they can contribute to Japan's welfare." So this is kind of their heart behind it, is that they respect the West. They think that there's some things that the West is doing really well, but they want to be selective with what they adopt because they want to make sure that everything that they change is to actually benefit the Japanese. The end of an era. When Emperor Meiji died in 1912, his leading general and the general's wife committed junshi, ritual suicide after the death of one's lord. Some Japanese praised the general's devotion and loyalty to the old values. Others felt his action, although sincere, belonged in past times and not in modern Japan. So this is one of those moments where people were like really different on it, because some people were like, "Oh yeah, this is how we used to do it, tradition," and other people were like, "That is old school. Why would we do that, right? We're a modern nation now. We don't need to do that anymore." Fast forward, the end of militarism. So this quote is a little bit confusing, I guess. So this it kind of has to do with Japan's role in World War II. So leading up to World War II, Japan had been taking a lot of territory. So we know that from what we were just reading, that Japan was wanting to become a military power. So they were trying to conquer in Korea and China and Russia and all of these places and going to war. So they were building this up. And the start of World War II, Japan was trying to extend their military influence by taking over. They wanted to become kind of an imperial superpower. And what ended up happening with that was that they ended up joining with Germany and Italy on that side of the Second World War, which was the side opposite of the U.S. and a lot of other countries. So there's sort of two alliances in World War II. And Canada at the time was a colony of England, and so we were a part of the other side. So Japan and England were on opposite sides of the war. And the Japanese bombed. One of their first things they did was they bombed the U.S. In Pearl Harbor, because they didn't like the way that the U.S. was kind of trying to stop them from their expansion. And they fought. They went to war with the U.S. in a pretty extreme, brutal, deadly way, which ended with the U.S. bombing Japan, which led to the Japanese surrender. So, the end of militarism says, aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on order, the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. So this is a quote from something that was written by the Americans after the war, basically telling Japan what they can and cannot do. So in order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency or warlike behavior of the state will not be recognized. So This is called Article 9, which was written into the 1947 Constitution of Japan by American officials. So the Americans wrote this into the Japanese Constitution after the war, basically saying Japan will no longer be able to use force. Basically, like Japan can't go to war anymore. Japan was to remain an unarmed nation that would never again pose a military threat. However, the international situation changed quickly after the war. China and the Soviet Union, Western allies that had helped to defeat Japan, were quickly seen as America's enemies because of their communist leadership. By the time Japan signed a peace treaty, it was considered by the U.S. to be an ally and important to the defense of democracy worldwide. So it sort of changed where not long after the war, Japan and the U.S. Sort of became allies and were on the same side, so it wasn't as big of a deal. This picture, on September 2nd, 1945, Japanese officials signed the official instrument of surrender aboard the USS Missouri. Why do you think the Americans had them sign the document there? We're not going to get into that too much because we didn't get super deep into the war, so I feel like it's not super fair to ask you to know that. The 20th century and beyond. So the militarization and imperialism that began during the Meiji era led Japan to its involvement in World War II and eventual defeat in 1945, with the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In his book, A History of Japan, historian Kenneth Henshall describes what happened next. So before I read that, so the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was incredibly detrimental. The U.S. wanted Japan to surrender, but did not want to lose a whole bunch of American lives in the process. So what they decided to do was to drop atomic bombs, which ended up killing huge numbers of people in Japan. They killed lots of innocent civilians. They did one, Japan didn't surrender, so they dropped another one, and then Japan did surrender. So this is the quote from the historian. He said, "The term miracle has been applied by Westerners more than once to Japan's modern history. It has been used to describe its achievements in Meiji, when in just half a century it developed from an obscure and isolated land of paddy fields to a major imperial power." So they're saying the Westerners, there are people that have called that a miracle, to go in that period of time from being like a completely isolated nation to being a major power on the world stage. It was used again just a few decades later to describe the nation's even more rapid post-war, after World War II, rise from the ashes of defeat to become, by some measures, the wealthiest on the planet, and by any measures, a huge economic superpower. So they're saying that Japan it's almost a miracle that they went from being closed to being a power so fast, and then it was another miracle that they went from such a brutal defeat in World War II to being a huge economic power, a wealthy, strong country. How did this latest miracle come about? Henshall and others point to factors like the following to explain Japan's economic success. Number one, the ability of the Japanese to learn from others and to adapt and improve these borrowings. So they say that that's one of Japan's strengths, is that they take these things and they adapt them to themselves, and they always are looking to get better. Number two, the importance of learning and education. Number three, the Japanese desire to make their country powerful and respected in the world. And number four, the willingness of the Japanese to work hard and make sacrifices for the greater good of the group and society in general. So some of these Japanese values are things that have actually made their country be able to bounce back and become very strong. Japanese management practices were studied by other countries who were eager to copy their success. The strong Japanese economy led to prosperity and consumerism. Prosperity meaning rich, like being rich, and consumerism meaning the sort of like wanting stuff, getting stuff. By the late 60s, the goal was a car, a color TV, and an air conditioner in every Japanese home. So Japan was economically wealthy and therefore wanted like wanting stuff and being rich was important. Figure 1620. Manga, Japanese comics, and anime, Japanese animation have millions of devoted fans around the world. Are you or anyone you know fans? What is the appeal of these forms of popular culture? So why do people like it? Even if you don't like it, why do you think other people like it? Okay, Japanese youth today. This is the end. We're almost done, guys. The younger generation who grew up in prosperous or rich times has been accused of rejecting traditional Japanese values, of being absorbed in their own interests and peer groups, of identifying less with their community or society. So this is like a very common thing, not just in Japan, but this idea of like, well, people that grow up in rich times where there isn't as many problems don't seem to understand, what maybe their parents went through, that kind of stuff. So in Japan, they're saying the young people don't seem to care, some of them, as much about their culture. Young people in Japan no longer expect to find lifelong jobs when they leave school. A growing number of them live at home with their parents. Many young people have become freeders with wild clothing and colorful hair who drift from one part-time job to another. So that would not fit. Like, think about traditional Japanese culture, like the Edo period. People had sort of a niche in life and they stayed in it and they worked hard. And now people are just like doing what they want, which is very much a modern thing to do here as well. But in Japan, you can imagine how much that comes in conflict with some of the values, the traditional values of everyone sort of being the same, thinking the same. And these young people are saying, no, we want to do our own thing. There are growing numbers of reports of problems such as violence, bullying, and absenteeism or missing school in Japanese school. And so no longer are people just like super strict following the rules. Sometimes some of these Japanese youth are just doing their own thing. Just as Japanese popular culture like manga and anime spread around the world, the youth of Japan are being influenced by foreign, mostly American, music and fashion. So with the borders being open, like Japanese youth have American TV shows, right? And they have all this American media that they can watch and follow, and so they have this like interesting contrast between Japanese values and American values. Hip-hop music, for example, has become very popular. According to Vanessa Altman-Siegel, who writes about Japanese youth culture, the exposure to Afro-American culture has prompted young Japanese to explore injustice within their own society. Discrimination against minority groups, like the Ainus and Koreans living in Japan, have recently been acknowledged. Some people, however, complain that young hip-hop fans are simply copying a foreign culture and have lost their Japanese identity. So, seeing what's going on in the rest of the world, these young Japanese were starting to challenge what was going on in the treatment of minorities within their own country, and have kind of started to bring about conversations about discrimination, which is really cool. But then people are criticizing them that they have lost their copying and they've lost their Japanese identity. So for young Japanese right now, it's a super complicated thing in finding their own identity within their Japanese culture as well as in the world, because they're exposed to so much different cultures that their parents maybe weren't, due to the less media and less connection to the outside world. So this picture here, it says these Japanese teenagers are known as Harajuku girls. They gather with their friends at a shopping and a hangout area, which is known as a strange mixture of Hello Kitty hip-hop and the infamous British punk style is popular. In what ways are Canadian teens similar to Harajuku girls? I'm not going to get you to answer that one just because of time. But yeah, so there's this sort of mixture of like Hello Kitty, which is a Japanese thing, hip-hop, British punk. These young Japanese are bringing together all of these different cultures and not necessarily sticking with their purely Japanese culture. So, guys, we did it. We read through a whole chapter. I know that was a lot. I know that it probably wasn't your most fun thing in the whole world, and maybe it was one of your least favorite things. But I think it is important to do just because we know we can. One thing that I did as I read it, You saw me do it a couple times where I clicked the dictionary and I put it on there. It's really important to look up words that you don't know. Make sure you're understanding, because reading nonfiction is really different than reading fiction. It is more challenging in the sense that if you're missing little pieces, you're really going to struggle potentially later on. So it's important to make sure that you understand. And it's not unusual to read things multiple times in a textbook. So I know for me, like in high school and in college, when I had to read textbooks, there were lots of times where I'd get to the end of a paragraph and I go, I don't understand it. Read it again. If I still don't understand it, maybe I need to do some other research. Maybe I need to, look up what some words mean. But it is a skill that we do need to continue to build and develop, because it is something that at some point in your education, probably sooner rather than later, you are going to be using. So I thank you very much for staying with me with this. I know that it was a lot, and my uh, my reading and stuff sometimes can be a little hard to follow, but you guys are awesome. I appreciate you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Thanks for a great year. A weird, great year.